I think somebody requested the slides. I'll send it to Ihsan. Ihsan will pass it on to the. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. So we don't need to take too much notes in that sense. Right? So just before I move on to the topic we were going to look at is what was it? Reform within the tradition, or reformist, those who did reform. Let's look at how we try to understand Qur'an and Sunna in its textual form. So epistemology is the theory of knowledge. Right? So let's see how we look at knowledge. So there's things in the tradition, ilm in its broadest term, in knowledge in its broadest term, that are decisive in authenticity, you can't doubt it, and meaning as well. So in Arabic, qat'iyya thubut wal ma'na. Right. Then you got type of knowledge which is decisive in authenticity, but speculative in meaning. Qat'iyya thubut, and what is that? Dhanni al ma'na. Right. And then you got the two other forms, right? Speculative in authenticity, so dhanni al thubut and qat'iyya al ma'na, but its meaning could be absolutely correct. And then you got one which is speculative in authenticity, the dhanni al ma'na, and thubut, both. So, really, just to help us understand knowledge and the Quran and the Hadith and the rest, because some of the questions were regarding Hadith earlier on. So what you have here is the Quranic text, those two types of knowledge, if you like, or the value of knowledge is there in the Quran. Right? So you got obviously absolutely la rayba fihi, but at the same time there are meanings in the Quran that you have no knowledge of. So how do you understand it? And then largely the other two is in the Hadith traditions that you find this, right? And the point is, how do we understand this? Well, there's a bit of an irony, if you like. So this is open to interpretation, open to ijtihad. This is supposed to be the Hadith part. Because it's speculative, because it should be ijtihad. And I put the arrow with a little bit of, it's not clear, right? It should make sense that it should be open to interpretation, because the nature of that knowledge is speculative. We should be able to speculate. This is not not open to interpretation because la rayba fihi. And I've put a question mark there. If we know the meaning, why are we interpreting, right? So this is a sort of paradox in a sense. So what we have here in the Quran, despite absolute, unanimous decisiveness in the authenticity, there's so many different tafsirs. The question that you asked earlier on about akal, right, is really a lot of exercise of reason has gone into the exegetical tradition right from the early days to our times. And you've got all of these different schools of exegesis. On the other hand, so that's for a text which is absolute in its meaning in terms of authenticity. In the Hadith tradition, this is strange that it's not happened. And this is where if you like, the ambit of reform will come, is how you interpret this. Despite having unanimous speculative, in other words, there is doubt here in terms of which Hadith. It's resisted non-literal interpretation. Whereas Quran hasn't. Quran has been open to non-literal, majaz, tafsir, absolutely throughout the centuries. Even though it's qat'i knowledge, zanni knowledge should be zanni. Speculative knowledge, there should be more speculation, but it's resisted this, right? This is something for you guys to think about, right? Okay, that aside, let's see what we got in the next few things. Okay, right. This is just a nice diagram to explain something in terms of where ijtihad can be done. One of the questions, I think the sister at the front of the object maqasid question. If we look at this, those of you who have done Sharia studies, right, in the big books of fiqh in the past, now you got the 5 pillars stuff, right, but a lot of the other laws of Islam are not really perhaps even relevant now in that sense, right? Usually, if you study fiqh with someone, they'll say, look, some of the masail are long gone. The issues of wells. There are some countries in the world where we still got the well stuff, right? But those masail are not relevant anymore. Slavery, other things as well, right? And I'm saying with a question mark because of recent stuff, right? So what you see is worship, personal law, halal, haram, marriage, and the rest of that stuff. On other things, ethics, the Quran has got a lot of details there. That's it. But things pertaining to the muamalat, civil transactions, only a few. The interest stuff is there. And the rest of, how you conduct ourselves has been the product of really speculative knowledge. This is a Quran only fiqh, what I've put here, Quran only, right? And the books of fiqh are quite, evenly spaced out, right? Public administration, there's so much of other things. In other words, what do we mean by this stuff? There's, in the ibadat, there's a lot of text, so there's less ijtihad that needs to be done there, right? Going back to Iqbal, how do you read namaz? Like what he said, his mum taught him how to pray, right? And that's fine, right? That it fits within the sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, pray as you saw me pray. Really, it's not really just from the hadith. It is from seeing someone pray that we know this sort of stuff. Muamalat, there's not that much text. So that means you can do much more ijtihad. And that's why the ijtihad of each generation changes as a result of this sort of stuff. Some books were more voluminous, then they get shorter, then they expand again. Right, we see this again and again. Have I got other things here? Yeah, okay. Yeah, most of your daily life is in the worldly domain. Terra, I've just tried to sound clever, right? Terra secularis, right? The secular terrain, if you like. And that is la tansa nasibuka min ad-dunya. Don't forget your portion of this world. And then there's the hadith tradition, antum awla bi umuri dunyakum. Look, a lot of early 19th century nationalists, secularists, they use this sort of stuff. But there's some weight to that type of argument. A lot of the reform scholars are using this now. So yeah, must be contextual to time and space. What is this? Ahmad Reza Khan in the thing, Ayat al-Ahkam, it becomes this sort of stuff. You know, a lot of this stuff that we see in, this is a Sufi scholar who uses certain ayat from the Quran to argue new things. Right? The religio-cultural practices. People forget that urf is also part of Sharia as well. And there can be bad urf, just like any other, like innovation, good innovation, bad innovation. There's good urf and there's bad urf. Going back to that Meccan universalism, can we really use, Mecca or the Arab example as the sunnah for all of the ummah? That's the type of thing that we've always negotiated. We've always juggled with these things. Right. And anything else here? I can't remember. Oh yeah, it's the Quran. In Christian theology, they use this language of, is the Quran a sola scriptura or a prima scriptura? Is the Quran the only source of guidance or the first source of guidance? And, well, I guess it's both in a sense, right? But largely, the Maturidis argued actually it's a prima scriptura, it's the first source of guidance. In other words, you work out everything else yourselves. Right? And that's part of that whole thing about inna hadha al-Quran yahdi lillati hiya aqwam. The Quran guides to that which is outside the Quran as well. And that's part of it. Right? Yes, ma faradna fil kitabi min shay, we've not left anything out in this book. Sometimes it's contextual as well. That book, does it mean Kitabullah, does it mean something else? But in general, the Quran guides to anything outside of the Quran which is good, which is upright. So, right. Ijtihad, here, should I just leave this? I mean, look, some of the key things here is what does a mujtahid need to do? Discover law that is stated explicit in the primary sources or implied by the text. And you do it through literal interpretation. That's the easiest one. Right? Second, extend law to new cases. That's the analogy stuff. So let's use the example of drugs, for example. Right? What I mean, drugs, narcotics, right? Extend the law to new cases that are not covered by the previous two methods. So there's no really analogy there at all. Cloning is one example, right? Many of these fiqh academies established that, okay, you can't clone a human being, but what about stem cell research? They've really given it a lot of thought because there's nothing there to clearly enunciate this. Right. And then when there's weighing up of evidences, if there's contradiction, how do you deal with this conflict? Right? This is part and parcel of what a mujtahid would do. Right. Yeah, key thing is this. Ijtihad and liberty go together. Right? I'm sorry, the order isn't the same. Traditionally, these were the prerequisites of mujtahid. So going back to that question, the sister, you asked about authority. Who gets to deliver the fatwas in that sense? Well, really the mufti is a mujtahid. It doesn't matter whether they follow a madhab or not. Right? The act of iftar is the act of ijtihad itself. So these are the type of things they agreed upon. In fact, you didn't need to be a master of all of this sort of stuff, but that's how it's presented. Especially how we theorize the mujtahid mutlaq, the mujtahid muqayyad. Look, it's all how we, over time, we understood. Look, none of these terms are necessarily from the Quran or the Sunnah or the early generation as such. So knowledge of, really, you didn't need to be a hafiz of Quran to be a mujtahid, right? Ata ibn Abi Rabah, one of the great tabi'in, he used to, he was the Imam al-Haramain at that time, a descendant of Hazrat Bilal. And Ata used to paraphrase the Quran. This is something unimaginable now, right? You know, because if you quote, especially in Arabic, if you look in English, you can do it. In other languages, you want to mention a verse, read from the, I think, read what, right, your Lord has taught. You can paraphrase. He used to paraphrase the Quran in Arabic. Now they call it a tafsir al-ijmali type stuff. He used to do that, right? It's considered new now, tafsir al-ijmali, right? So you don't need to be a hafiz of the ayat al-ahkam. There's about 500 odd verses in the early days. What else? Knowledge of the Sunnah, jurisprudential tradition. Let's just say Bulugh al-Maram. There are books on this sort of stuff. Ijma, that's a difficult one, right? Where on all issues that ijma has been convened on. Nasikh and mansukh becomes difficult because there's arguments regarding this. Usul al-fiqh, well, usul al-fiqh comes a little later than many of the mujtahids in that sense. Shafi does write about it in his usul, but later it becomes a lot more formulated. Right. The thing that is for us, I mean, some of you are engineers, some of you are doctors, some of you are activists, and it's important. We need to listen to the activists because they understand society. Right? Ivory Tower academics, the ulama, same thing, right? They're in the madrasas and the mimbars. They argued ijtihad is not divisible in the early days, the majority. That means everybody has to really become a master, the Renaissance man, right? In that sense, right? But it's impossible. So for that, the Zahiris argued no, ijtihad is divisible. In other words, interdisciplinarity, right? That's how the Zahiris understood this. So most have accepted that now. Even though I've said Jumhur in the early classical usul, now most have accepted that. Look, you need to go to the doctors to understand stem cell research. Look, I don't understand that stuff. Even in riba yesterday was spoken about. It's very complicated, right? It's a lucrative business as well, right? That whole thing, industry. So these are some of the things they argue that there's so many different types of mujtahids. Okay, what about ijma? Who should do this? Going back to that question of reform, it's about ijtihad itself. Oops, pretty good. Yeah. There was only one group who argued that ijtihad is fard on every single, it's obligatory on all Muslims, and that was the Jahmis. And they actually argued not in this sort of absolute way. It's just about you should know things, right? Because of ikra, go and learn. The others just said it's fard kifaya, this whole thing. Oh God, this is supposed to be taqleed. I forgot to put the whole stuff. Yeah, I mean taqleed is seen in negative terms as well, just like reform is. So the conservatives, when they argue about taqleed, you should follow those in authority amongst you. Taqleed, if ijtihad and liberty go together, then taqleed and authority go together in that sense, right? You submit to authority. In doctrine, there's no taqleed, right, at all. Right? You should believe in Allah based on burhan, yourself, not necessarily because somebody else said so. Some mutakallim before you said so, some imam or some ayatullah. What is it in terms of imitation in daily life? A lot of us do this. Look, you go to the mechanic, you go to the doctor, you accept everything. Now, this is the argument of taqleed. Now, taqleed as a means, that's fine, people accept it. As an end in itself, okay, far more thing. Taqleed nowadays, in the past, it was just understood as following scholarship. Sorry, it's gone here. But the way how it's framed in our times is taqleed to madhabs as such. And there's obviously different positions on this. Follow the madhabs, don't follow madhabs, but then follow a madhab with some liberty in between, some sort of leeway. And then there's follow a madhab and do what you want type thing as well. Madhabiyya bit talfiq. What about those other madhabs? Someone mentioned that there were more than 4 madhabs, right? Yeah, those opinions are still there, and people are using those opinions now. In the past, they didn't because they were comfortable with power. The first time we start hearing the 4 madhabs is a lot later. In fact, there were 5 madhabs as well, if we include the Zahiris. Now there's 8 madhabs, right, with the Amman declaration as well, right? So including the non-Sunni ones, right? But it's all part of tradition. Does haq become extinct? This is the argument about the Zahiri madhab is no longer valid. But those opinions are not too different from any of the opinions of all the fuqaha, right? So they use these, the closure of the door of ijtihad is a myth, and this is what Iqbal argues as well. What is this? Yeah, divisibility, right? I can't remember anything else I've put here. Is this talfiq? Yeah, talfiq is the last thing, right? Talfiq was one way, about 700 odd years ago, they decided to deal with the limitations of absolutely just following one madhab. So one of the last thing here, in fact, there's a whole fight right now in Bangladesh on the Tabligh Jamaat you mentioned, Ehsan, between within the group itself, and it's one which actually emanates from this issue about taking. I'm bringing this. This is controversy from me, right? Is charging to teach the Deen, right? Now, according to the 4 madhabs, is absolutely haram. Yep. Right, but these guys are reformers, right? So they're not going to give you your money back, right? So, right. So the thing is, this is right, and I've accepted your gift, right? So I'm not going to. So the thing is, this is because the way they looked at it is like kitmanul ilm. It's like hiding knowledge, and that's why they said it was haram in the early days. Even for hadith studies as well, to narrate hadith, hal yajuzu akhdul ujra? Can you take money on this? And some of them said yes. Now. There's only one opinion from Imam Shafi that says, look, because an alim who's poor, look, if he can't maintain himself, right, then the deen would be lost. Right? This is the argument. Now, all madaris have more or less taken that position, right, the position of Imam Shafi. You won't have Darul Uloom Deoband or any of these madaris around the world if they were strong Hanafis, Malikis, Shafis, and Hanbalis, right? In that sense, it's a rukhsa that they've taken from Imam Imam Shafi. So the big split now amongst the Tablighi tradition is this, right? The Tablighi Jamaat are saying, the Saad group is one group, that look, we do this for Allah's sake, right? Whereas you charge people. This is the argument. But this is where it comes from. That's the point. And they had to reform. Rashid Ahmad Gangohi, one of the founding fathers of the Deoband, says in his fatwa now, it's in Arabic, so not many would read it that easily. وَنَأْخُذُ بِقَوْلِ الشَّافِعِ. This is a Hanafi saying, we take Shafi's view on this. Right, so anyway, this is an example of talfiq, right? Right. Yeah, look at this sort of stuff. Yeah, Imam Bukhari saying, advocating strict conformism. Yeah, ilzam ma la yalzam. This is really one of the best definitions of bid'ah. Isn't the fact that it's new, isn't the fact that it's whims and desires, is ilzam ma la yalzam. Making obligatory that which isn't obligatory. That is really one of the best definitions of bid'ah. Right, so reformist, what was that? Sorry, I didn't even read that. Right. Yeah, reformist thought within the Islamic scholastic heritage. Like I said earlier on, right, all of the imams that you can think of were reformers. So there's no point really concentrating on individuals as such. Let's look at the processes, how they did this reform. And plus from your questions as well, I think is relevant. So hadith is where really most of this stuff is taking place, right? How do we understand this sort of stuff, right? Because it's a critical method in and of itself, right? The word that they use for hadith, the hadith science, is naqd, right? Is criticality, right? And I mean, we can all agree ghiba is bad, yes? Backbiting is bad. Could it be useful? So, sister, you said it could be useful. Why? Okay, to warn of others. Right, okay. So the thing is, this is, look, it goes against Islamic ethics. Yet, to preserve the hadith tradition, we needed to do something which is akin to ghiba, right? Dhikruka akhaka bima yakrahu. Look, if someone said, right, Taj is sayyi al-hifz, right, or su al-hifz, sayyi al-akhlaq and all this sort of stuff, right, and qalil al-ilm and the rest of it, I wouldn't like it. But these are written down, this sort of stuff, is to protect the knowledge. So it was an innovative means that they actually persisted. Well, Lucknowi speaks about this, that this is istihsanan, bid'ah hasana, is doing something which is khilaf al-sunnah. Ghiba is khilaf al-sunnah, but for a good cause. So this is the argument. So let's look at some of the hadith traditions, right? Okay, qawl, fi'l, and taqrir of the Prophet. This is the easiest definition of sunnah. The taqrir one is important because some of the things the Prophet didn't do, but aqarrahu Rasul. He said it's okay, then it's considered part of the sunnah. It's similar to, I think, imitatio Christi, imitating Christ. Would Christ have done this? Okay, orthopraxy, right, definitive, these are the things we've covered. Right, how do we know things, right? So the way we know things are three ways, right? Through the five senses, through true report, and through rationalization, through akal. Now what you have is we invented the way how we actually understand khabar sadiq, true report, and that's through this means tawatur and ahad, right? This type of demarcation, this type of way of looking at knowledge, right? Dividing knowledge. So the solitary hadith, which is the bulk of most of the hadith tradition, is in four categories. It too was two categories once, right? So four categories: authentic, sahih, hasan, da'if, and mawdu as well. It too, at one point, was two categories only. In the earliest times, the Salafiyat al-Aqlani, if you want to say, the earliest time was only two: hadith maqbool wa hadith mardud. Accepted hadith, reliable hadith, and unreliable hadith. Right? So what is we want to try to understand how we evaluate this knowledge tradition. So Quranic text, we can use the Christian terms, canonical. It's the canon. It's what we measure everything else by. And then the hadith corpus, largely, I put it largely, is apocryphal. It's not always the canon. There's some aspects of it that are canonical, right? And I've used that sort of Ahlul Kitabi thing. Razi says something about this type of knowledge, right? Transmitted knowledge, knowledge which is already transmitted to us. He said is yufidul la yufidu illa dhann. This type of is speculative knowledge. That's what it guarantees, speculative knowledge rather than decisive knowledge. Ibn Taymiyyah, on the other hand, is actually saying no, even transmitted knowledge, naql, provides yaqeen. Sorry, la yufidu yaqeen, is conclusive, gives some assurity as such. Now the thing is, the way we look at this sort of stuff is in a spectrum. So even if we say hada hadithun sahih, it's still speculative. It's sahih according to one person. It might be da'if according to another. Right, the further you get towards mutawatir, that's when it becomes la rayba fihi, if you like. And on the other hand, from good to weak, just because someone said it's a weak tradition, it might be sahih according to somebody else. It's a bit dubious there, speculative. And then going really definitive and dubious share the same value, which is this absolute. Right? So you are absolutely certain that is true, or you are absolutely certain that is false. Right? And then the intellect itself, right? How we do, this is akal, knowledge via via reasoning. And we deduce a lot of knowledge, and then something else, qiyas. So this is speculative knowledge. Yeah, sound senses, sorry. Seeing is belief is genuinely definitive. Sometimes it can be speculative. So even the five senses can trick you. The earth stands still. This is what they argued about the geocentric worldview. Like, well, what do you mean, right, that the earth orbits the sun? The earth is still. The sun goes up and it goes down, right? That's what your senses are telling you, right? So that's why I put it in. It can be speculative, even the five senses, right? The transmitted knowledge can be speculative largely, but it can also be dubious. And then likewise with deducing knowledge, it can be speculative and it can be dubious as well. Going back to the, how do we actually grade all of this type of knowledge? If we go to taqleed and authority, you can say, look, 5 senses, seeing is believing type stuff, that's the value of that type of knowledge. And then if we go down ijtihad and liberty, a lot of it is speculating. Right. So that's the first thing. Right. In general philosophical terms, look, we've got Dr. Shabbir as well. Look, he's a philosopher. I won't try, he's someone who's actually deals with pure philosophy. So look, some of this stuff, if I'm wrong, look, you can. So there's really this idea of there's 2 approaches to knowledge: empiricism and rationalism. So even Islamically, really, the sound senses and khabar sadiq, true narrative, are the same. It's still sound, it's still sound senses is the true narrative. So if we want to think of it as thesis, antithesis, look, you come up with an idea, that becomes the idea, but how do you measure that idea? Look, those of you who are scientists, you understand that, look, it has to be measured according to evidence, and that evidence is the antithesis, yeah? You judge it with that. If it can be, some of that stuff, sound here, Mustafa Sibai, one of the great theologians, argued. Now, true narrative, so where does wahi fit in all this? So wahi, revelation, inspiration, ilham, intuition as well, kashf, and all this stuff. These are terms that people, over time, this is part of our epistemological tradition. This type of knowledge that we theorized over. Valid sources in mysticism, all of this sort of stuff. Now, both theologians and jurists, they argued that ليس الكشف في إثبات العلم من شيء. Kashf, which is a valid source according to the Sufis, a disclosure of knowledge, a type of knowledge, hidden knowledge that I might have about one of you, that you'd be surprised if I knew this, or likewise you knew something about me, this type of stuff, right? A type of ilm ghaib, if you like. But it's interesting that the theologians, the fuqaha and the mutakallimun and the theologians, both, the jurists and the theologians, they both agreed that kashf isn't reliable. And it's interesting that they said this sort of stuff. Now what you have is aql and naql. That's one way of looking at this whole thing, this whole discussion on reform, is this. For truth of a rational nature is through logic. That's how we understand this. Truth of an empirical nature is through the scientific method. Right? Now the idea of objective truths is really from this model, right? And the subjective truth really is affairs of the heart, how we understand this sort of stuff. How do we understand saints, prophets, is quite subjective, right? The prophet's experience is his personal experience. For us, it's empirical because we trust his personal experience. But what his personal experience is his own personal experience. We make a leap of faith in trying to understand this. I think it's not Frege. Who is this? Herzl. The variety of subjective truths as well. This is where we get phenomenology and other new branches of knowledge that's not value laden as such. And it's something that we need to think of as well in terms of how do we value this type of knowledge. A lot of postmodern scholars are quite comfortable with inspiration and intuition. Modernist scholars weren't. Seeing is believing is really the only type of knowledge there was. I can't remember if anything else is here. Okay, right. This is something we need to look at how in every branch of Islamic knowledge in the past, by that I mean the traditional syllabus, the madrasa syllabus, they looked at the ways science could be actually interpreted and understood. So tradition and naql, this niza, right, niza al-aql wal naql, we see it in the Arabic language. We see it in theology, right? In jurisprudence, in ethics, in the broadest term I'll use the word ethics, in hadith studies and also the Quranic studies. I think these are the only ones I've put together. There are probably more sciences. I've just put these because these are the ones that we're concerned with and the easiest ones in that sense. So There's a traditional approach, which is taqlid type approach, and then there's a rational approach, which is more ijtihad and sort of libertarian approach, if you like. So in grammar, even in the preservation of Arabic grammar, there was a taqlidi approach, and that was the approach of the Kufans, best understood as lexicography, just graphing out, writing out all of the lexical terms and the rules of language itself, right? Well, the opposite to that was the approach of the Basrans, which now we can call it modern linguistics, in a sense. This is Ibn al-Jinni and some of the others, Sibawayh and others, were actually speaking, they were using Farsi and other languages as a way of trying to understand Arabic, right, at the time. So it's far more ijtihadi. In fact, they used to say the Kufans were the muhaddisun an-nahu. They were the muhaddisun. So they were the hadith scholars. They were literalists in this approach. That dichotomy doesn't exist. Nobody really seriously would say, I'm a Kufi grammarian or a Basri grammarian now. Theology, again, we got this, the approach of the traditionalists. They were called the muhaddisun. They were literalists, and then you had the rationalists, mutakallimun. First were the Mu'tazila, then you got the Asharis. You could even include Ibn Taymiyyah in there, right? The Hanabila, Muhaddisun, you had Ibn al-Jawzi and many of the others as well. Right. In fiqh, you've got the traditional Ahl al-Hadith, which included the Shafis, the Hanbalis, possibly the Malikis, right? And then you had the opposite of them were the Ahl al-Ra'i. This division you also have in Shi'i circles as well. You've got the Usuliyun and the Akhbariyun traditions as well. Right. In ethics, let's say this is a type of traditionalism, practical thing. As Zuhud was suluk in the early days, ilm was suluk as well used. And then you also have more philosophical, tasawwuf, if you like, right? Tasawwuf al-falsafi. In hadith studies, you've got a similar approach, and this is one I'd like to introduce to yourselves. It's not been written yet, but I'll give you some ideas anyway, right? So, chain criticism. This is one we understand. This is how we understand hadith: is that this chain is weak, so therefore this hadith is weak. Right? The other approach is an approach which is understood as reform now. I've heard many of you speak about Ghulam Parvez and hadith denying and the rest of this stuff. But let's look at how this stuff is worked out. Right. This is called naqd al-matan. The matan doesn't sound correct. Are you really going to look at the sanad itself? This was an approach of Abu Hanifa and the Ahl al-Ra'i, right, towards hadith as well. They were muhaddisu al-Ra'i as well. In Quranic studies, this was clear. There's the ma'thur approach, the hadith approach. Now, there's not that many hadiths regarding the tafsir stuff. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal says a lot of that. The tafsir hadith are problematic. And a lot of it is from the Israeli traditions as well. And then you've got the ra'i, or ma'qul approach, right, hypothetical opinion. A lot of this is based on language. So Zamakhshari's tafsir is one, absolutely no problems in, where it's been published in most parts of the Muslim world. He's argued to be Mu'tazili. Right, so what you have here, two different approaches, using the word of textualism, probably the best, rather than literalism as such, right, and then intentionalism, going to that object-oriented jurisprudence. What's the authorial intent? Taqlid, and also there's an element of ijtihad. This is the battle, if you like, in the classical Islamic syllabus as well, and even in Islamic studies, university Islamic studies, MAD does throughout the Muslim world, and even in the West. I don't know if I've put anything else here. I can't remember. Interpretation, orthopraxy, orthodoxy, those are the other questions whenever we want to reform, we want to understand these things. There's no absolute one way of doing all this stuff anyway. Can't remember what else. Anything else? Right, this is something we want to try to look at text analysis of hadith. Now, right. I believe Ibn al-Tayyib said the first one, soundness of isnad. I think it was Ibn al-Tayyib. He says, soundness of isnad is not considered definitive proof of the actual genuineness of the text, of the matan itself. So sanad is not qat'i until we actually analyze the matan itself, of the traditions to which they are attached. And Ibn Qutayba said the same. Even if the isnad is completely without the fault, the text should be analyzed before, right? Before the genuineness of attribution can be established. Now this is where this type of approach to hadith might be a bit, Ibn Qutayba, that's the one. Like if you encounter hadith contrary to reason, goes against reason, or that which is established as correctly reported or against accepted principles, then you should know that it's forged. Despite the fact that people have isnads for these things. So there was an argument that al-isnad is from the deen. If it wasn't for isnad, people would have said whatever they wanted to. The sad truth is that people continued to say whatever they wanted to by inventing isnads, by concocting isnads. Yeah. So Suyuti as well said it goes hand in hand. So naqd al-matan, what are the approaches to naqd al-matan? This is practical stuff in terms of how you could use this sort of stuff. It won't give you the value of the hadith itself. It's just a way of critiquing hadith and looking at the hadith tradition. Right, so naqd al-matan, one of the approaches, tradition must not contradict the Quran, mass transmitted tradition or the consensus of the community, or the basic principles of Islam, Tawheed or any of these sort of things. If it's clearly there's a problem here, right? So if there's a mutawatir hadith against a ahad hadith, you're obviously going to go with the mutawatir. The mass transmitted is easier, right? Tradition must not contradict the dictates of reason. So there are traditions which yukhalif al-aql, right? I'm using saying they're not scientific, right, in that sense, but and the laws of nature or common experience. So there's the famous tradition of Adam being 60 cubits. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says some things about that, right? There's actually in hadith studies they say one of the criticism ta'nun fil rawi is wahm, is are they imagining things? Is it their own interpretation of knowledge itself? Because knowledge is bound to be interpreted. Tradition describing disproportionately high reward for insignificant good deeds or disproportionately severe punishment for ordinary sins must be rejected. Now, yesterday, Professor Chandra mentioned the whole punish and what was it? Two P's and two E's and two P's. What were the two P's? Prohibition and punitive. So a lot of this stuff is just tarhib and tarhib rather than tarhib and tarhib, right? So what you have is sometimes there's a lot of this sort of stuff that people use in the Fadaili literature. Traditions describing the excellent properties of certain parts of the Quran might not be authentic. You find this in the Fadail literature. Traditions mentioning the superior virtue of persons, tribes, or particular places should be generally rejected. Now this includes male chauvinistic stuff and also racist stuff as well. You know, and I've mentioned Slavoj Žižek here, I think. No, I haven't. Žižek actually mentioned something about, it might be another one, right? But Imam Zarkashi mentions this about, look, some of this stuff, especially Aisha, radiallahu anha, actually says that what are these men saying, male companions. Traditions which contain detailed prophecies of future events equipped with dates should be rejected. This is the eschatological stuff. Ibn Khaldun said, look, he speaks about the whole end of days narratives, and he actually says, look, the reality of these things are not known in the details. But what we can say is that, look, there are ahad traditions, and every generation tends to claim, and it's actually in his Muqaddimah, where he mentions the black flags of Khurasan and all this. Do you really think in every generation a group hasn't emerged and said that we are, the army of the Mahdi and all this sort of stuff? Taliban did it, some other ISIL will do it, then another group will come. That's how this stuff happens. But anyway, this is something Ibn Khaldun said, right? And traditions containing such remarks of the Prophet as may not be part of the prophetic tradition. There, Ibn Taymiyyah says this. This question Ibn Taymiyyah was once asked about, it's a question that Christian theologians were asked, which is, could God create a rock which he can't lift? Has anyone heard of this? You've heard this one, right? This is the same question. It's in the Fatawa. His answer is brilliant. Does anyone know his answer? It's a brilliant answer. هَذَا لَا يَلِيكُ بِجَلَالِهِ. This does not befit his majesty. right? And that's the same with the Prophet. Would the Prophet have said something as nasty, as problematic as this? Look, the whole satanic verses stuff, how do we respond to that? Is that sort of stuff, هَذَا لَا يَلِيكُ بِهِ بِجَلَالِ النَّبِي, right? It doesn't. You know, for him to succumb to Lat, Uzza, Manat and all this, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, that's how they did this sort of stuff. So the flaws of the Prophet. Okay. This one, okay, it doesn't really mean much, right? But then nonetheless, they had this sort of stuff. So what you had was Habib Rahman Kiranwi says, rarely, unfortunately, people did text criticism. And it's only now that people are really looking at a lot more text criticism. Some of the other traditions, look, the Ibadis, the Zaydis as well, have used some text criticism as well, right? And obviously many of the Hanafis as well. Yeah, this was the approach of Abu Hanifa. You know, why is it Abu Hanifa is not accepting so many hadiths? In fact, that was his, when people said Abu Hanifa was weak in hadith, it's actually something else. It's kana mutashaddidan fi qubul al-hadith. He was very extreme in accepting the hadith. He was basically a hadith critic in many ways. So, what is it? Akal and nakal. What does reason tell us? Right, so if we go to that whole knowledge way of looking at stuff, is the chain empirical? If it is seeing and believing, traditions telling us narrate the truth from the reliable source. So truth itself and also reliable source. The problem is it can be subjective. On the other hand, if the text is rational in its nature, because we're trying to understand it, if it's not making sense with overall understanding of the tradition and orthodoxy, if you like, so we're judging the text by bias, if you like, the other bias, then there's a problem of revisionism as well. But look, these things are not easily reconciled, but it's the challenge of dealing with knowledge. So, Ihsan, just be mindful of time. Right, this is, I'm not going to go through this, right, but it took me some time doing this. It looks brilliant, doesn't it, right? Say mashallah then. Right, so this is, right, there's 62 things here. Right, hold on. We're almost there, It's going to take. All right. Right, okay. So look, in Mustalah al-Hadith, it is a science. Look, Hadith isn't, people really need to understand that the default stance of science is skepticism. And believe me, Hadith is like that. That's why I said about ghiba. It sounds wrong. How can you say we're using ghiba to establish sunnah in a sense, or knowledge of sunnah? It is very complicated science, and it is actually very scientific. I'm not trying to use it in positive terms, right? And I mean positivistic terms, not. So, what is it? Look, what we can see is there's a lot more activity taking place in the sanad, a little less on the matan, right? And this is what Ibn Hibban says. The traditionists, right, on the whole, so the Ahl al-Athar, Ahl al-Hadith, right, يحفظون الرجال دون الإسناد. Right. Sorry, this is the traditionists. Yeah, the Muhaddisun preserve the Rijal and Sanad. Dun al-Matan. They're not that interested in the Matan. That's what he's saying. Yahfazun everything. On the other one, he said al-Fuqaha. By that he means Abu Hanifa, maybe some of the others, right? Malik as well. Yahfazun al-Ghalibu fihim. Right. Generally is Yahfazun al-Mutun and al-Ahkam bil-Ma'na. Right. Dun al-Asanid wal-Rijal. This is why there's a dichotomy in how we look at hadith itself. That being done, right, let's look at how this process actually manifests in thing, right? Now, you got the chain, sanad. You got the matan. Oops. And then you got a hukam. So even in hadith, look, we looked at all the other sciences. There's this akal nakal. So every science will have this akal nakal type approach. Right, so we got, I've put in asterisk Arabia because it's the early days. Right? After that, hadith is all over the world, right? But let's just take the earliest times, right? Arabia, by that I mean Jazeera, and then Iraq, right? So these are the two places. So what you have is the first process is the referencing stuff, isnad, azwul qawli la qa'ilihi, right? And then you've got two approaches. So the Arabian scholars, or the Hijaz scholars, they're interested in how retentive, how good the memory of the narrator is. That's how we're going to establish the knowledge, right? Or certainty of knowledge. Yufid al-ilm al-yaqeen. That's how we establish yaqeen. Right. On the other hand, the Ahl al-Iraq is no fiqh rawi. That's what they're more interested in. Does the hadith narrator understand the tradition that they're relating? And that's also actually a position that gets a bit complicated. Malik's on this side, but Malik as well argues this stuff, right? If they're not acting upon what they know or what they're relating, then it's not acceptable. Abu Hanifa argues this, right? Tahkim al-aql al-nas, right? Rationalizing the matan. So what you have, this approach is after establishing the sanad, they're going to look at the text, right? This is their approach. The approach of the Iraqi scholars is ard al-matan on everything else. First we look at the matan, and then we'll do everything else, right? Does the matan agree with the Quran and the collective wisdom of understanding the Sunnah, right? Then what you have is the last hukam, if you like. How do we actually judge this? You got the way this is an approach. Bukhari said it, Hakim said it. It must be true. Right, this is an approach which is the fatwas, if you like, of the authorities, tansis al-thiqa. By saying that these scholars have said it, it has to be true, that their judgment is what we're relying on. On this approach, it's actually dhann al-thiqa. It's an ijtihad of Bukhari, Muslim, or any of the others. That's the different approach. Now, ijtihad, la yanqudu bimithlihi. One ijtihad is not annulled by another. Right, so what you have is reason says an-naql. So traditions, the narrator tells us the Prophet says so. The default stance here is the narrator is trustworthy, hadith is okay. But the sound senses, that's where it's coming from. The Zahiris, Hanbalis, some of the Shafis are arguing this. On the other hand, reason says text goes against what we know of the Prophet. So for text to be, the default stance is that text is trustworthy. If it's trustworthy, then it's okay. If it makes sense, then it's okay. The epistemological concern is common sense. The Malikis, they have their Amal Ahl al-Madina. If anything goes against Amal Ahl al-Madina, which is probably empirical as well, they'll reject it. And then the Hanafis with Qiyas. Qiyas is ijtihad anyway. So what you have, even in the establishment of the Quran, there's different approaches. So you got the Arabian scholars, you got the Iraqi scholars, Hadith scholars, different thing, and then you got the fuqaha here, right? This is one way of looking. If you want to take a picture, do so. What is this? What happens as a result is two different approaches. People of Iraq produce less hadith scholarship in the early days, right? Later on they do, right? And then people here, you can take this picture, right? This gives us a sort of understanding. Have I got about 10 minutes or so? All right, we'll see, right, what we got. I think I've only got about one more slide or something. I can't remember. Right. Okay, this is a sort of way of understanding, hadith and how it's produced. So, if we say a hadith, any hadith, innamal a'mal bin niyat, we have to look at who's narrated it. So there's a body of knowledge that's produced to preserve that. That's called the Tarikh books. Bukhari's got one, Tarikh al-Bukhari, and the Rijal books as well. Right? And they call Rijal, there's a lot of Nisa in there as well, right? But they're just called biography books, Ma'ajim as well. Sanad, obviously the Sanad of the Hadith is a type of knowledge as well, right? And it's connected to the Rijal. Then we have the Sunnah books, the actual collections of the Hadith, and these are connected to the Matan itself. So many, Hadith collections that have the words of the Prophet. And then what you have is that fancy slide with all the details, right? The mustalah, the terminology of how we want to understand hadith, and then the hukam. Is it sahih? Is it daif? Is it hasan or mawdu? And then what you have here is this science is literally is invented. So giving people the benefit of the doubt. Al-aslu bara'at al-dhimma. The default stance is you're innocent until proven guilty, yes? That's fine, that's Sharia. When it comes to hadith, you are not trustworthy until we can prove that you're trustworthy. right? It's the opposite approach in this, right? Only Ibn Abdul Barr was the only scholar who said, no, we have to assume that the hadith is correct. We have to prove that they're liars, right? And Jarh and Ta'dil became the first is Jarh. Jarh is literally wounding, right? And then Ta'wil is Ta'dil, sorry. And then his probity is actually validating these people, the impugnment and validation, right? In law, you impugn your witness, cross-examination, that sort of stuff. The fiqh of the hadith itself, Abu Hanifa rejects a number of hadiths. Abu Huraira's hadith, he says, look, Abu Huraira didn't understand this narration like Ibn Masud, and that's why he accept Ibn Masud's understanding. Method on what's this, right? This is a category. I can't remember whatever else I put here. The biographies, Hilyat al-Awliya, some of the literature come out of this sort of stuff, and then the Kalam al-Rasul stuff. Is this all there is? I think this is it. Yeah. Am I too far away from there? Okay, right. I can't remember that. Okay. Okay, these are some of the groups. Have I got 5 minutes, you say? I mean, some of this stuff I could just whiz past, and we can leave it to thinking. So anyway, let's just look at some of the Neo Salafiyya. Yesterday, what is it? Dr. Ahmad Farouk Sahab said, he used the word Salafiyat al-Aqlaniyya, but there's another type of Salafiyya as well. Really, it wasn't called, I mean, the word Wahhabi is used for this particular movement. It was an Islahi movement, right? And they called it Da'wat al-Islah fi Najd, basically, the ulama of Najd at that time. Because Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was from the Najd, some use the word Najdiyya as a sect, pejoratively. It didn't really stick because they were quite comfortable in saying, we are the ulama of Najd. So, it's like Deoband. The fuqaha there called them Deobandis, they're quite proud of it. So then they thought, well, his name is Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, so let's call him Muhammadiyya. Now, that doesn't stick to use the Prophet's name pejoratively. And then somehow, his name is Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, his father's name is Abdul Wahhab, so they used that as a pejorative term and it stuck. A lot of it is to do with, obviously, the politics of the day as well. No, it's not mine, is it? Oh, it's the other thing here, sorry. Right, so what you have is this link. I've only put Sheikh Rashid Rida there, is only because of the Hanbali sort of centrality. That's the only reason I've put him there. Otherwise, he's Salafiyat al-Aqlaniyya, right? And Ibn Hazm and others. Ibn Taymiyyah from early days. And right, Albani, Nasruddin al-Albani becomes, if you like, the spokesperson, interlocutor of this, right? And then what you have is, what is it? Sorry, I'm going to get out of this easier because there's too much thing. It's too slow this way. Right, let's look at it like this. Right, so the Neo Salafiyya, you've got all of these things. The key thing is this. What is their reform agenda? Tawheed, or Khalis al Tawheed, sometimes they'll use the word. Make it bigger. Side small. Well, this one. Yeah, no, I went to that, but it's slow. What happened there? All right, okay. Right, okay, I'll just go all the way down. Let's see. It'll come up in a few seconds, right? Yeah, there you go. Right, so look, there's certain concepts of reform here. So look at this. Against shirk here, iconoclastic, destroying icons. Sunnat al-Mutahhara, this concept of cleaning the sunnah, right? And then, look, the Salafi Aqlaniyat is what you spoke about yesterday, how it went to something very different, right? But look, these are the things, anti-taqleed, anti-bid'ah, anti-tasawwuf. It's part of the concerns of a theologian's concerns of reform. So that's one of the first group. Second group, remember, because of subcontinental thing, I'm using the Ahl Hadith. This is not Ahl al-Hadith. This is not the traditional Ahl al-Hadith. This is the Ahl Hadith movement in the subcontinent. Zakir Naik, these sort of figures are from this tradition. Right. When it comes up. So this tradition was what? Shah Waliullah is one of the main things. This becomes interesting, you'll see. Shah Waliullah's name's there now. You have getting rid of bid'ah, la madhhabiyya, and they're arguing the Ahl al-Hadith, Ahl al-Ra'i dichotomy. Let's renew this thing. And they're very anti-taqleed. Right, that's them. Same sort of stuff, anti-taqleed, anti-bid'ah, tawheed stuff, and then what they call ittiba' ad-dalil, following the dalil. Right, right. Next one. Just one, two more after this. That's it. So the Deoband seminary. And look, you can supplant this in other ways, in different traditions, right? Again, Shah Waliullah is there. So they are into the pietism of the elders, what is it, Tawqir al-Akabirin, Ihya al-Sunnat, same sort of words. They're quite comfortable in maintaining the Ahl al-Ra'i, Ahl al-Hadith dichotomy, right? And look, some of those groups that we spoke about, Tabligh Jamaat, are there. But they become a buffer between this, if you like, Sufism and Wahhabism. They're quite comfortable with the Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They see him as a Sufi, right, which is quite interesting. Right, so key motifs: pro-taqleed, anti-bid'ah, pro-tasawwuf, and then what else do you have? Yeah, ittiba'i Rasul, following the Prophet, right, in its broadest sense. And then the last one is a Sufi movement, but they call themselves the Ahl Sunnah. This is not Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at per se. They are Sunnis, obviously, but it was a movement. It's Harkat Ahl Sunnat or Tahrik Ahl Sunnat. And this is Ahmad Raza Khan. And again, it's the same thinker, three different iterations of this of his thinking. So Ibn Shah Waliullah, Zaini Ahmad Dahlan in the Arab world. So they're looking at, yeah, what have we got here? Yeah, Ta'zeem al-Sha'air. So this becomes a lot more like the symbols of Islam, right? Or even the Prophet, it becomes a symbol of Islam. And then Ihsan's part of this, the whole Bid'ah Hasana stuff, right? So what happens is, yeah, Brelvism becomes a buffer between Sufism and Shiism. And this is similar in the Arab world. I'd say the Habaib of Yemen, similarly, their relationship with the Zaydis is indicative of this type of movement. In fact, they got good links with the Habaib. Right, what are these things? Key motifs in this movement: pro-kalam, pro-taqleed, pro-bid'ah in the sense of bid'ah hasana, and what else? Yeah, ishq Rasul, a love of the Prophet type thing, right? Whatever this means, right? Mahabbat al-Rasul, but ishq Rasul, obviously in Urdu, that's what they use. Is that okay? And then it looks like it's the next session. So that's everything. We've covered everything we wanted to.